Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 7th of April, 2026. Today, deadline day. Will Trump follow through on his threats to Iran? A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. This threat of annihilation and almost certain war crimes was posted by the US president today as his ultimatum for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz nears its deadline hour. It follows an expletive post over the Easter weekend, which promised, alongside quotes by Trump, to decimate every bridge in Iran and leave the country's power plants burning, exploding, and never to be used again. To this, Iran responded with threats to expand the war and deprive US allies of oil and gas for many years. They too are playing a social media game. Memes from Iranian embassies mock the US president as panicking in the face of defeat. But Trump's threat of indiscriminate violence are likely to shift panic onto Iranian civilians. Iran has faced intensive destruction and thousands of casualties during this war, including dozens of its senior officials. But it has arguably gained leverage due to its blockade of the Hormuz Strait, which has pushed global oil prices and geopolitical risk indices to post-pandemic highs. The US president is under pressure, and his deadlines to Iran have been as erratic as his language. His ultimatum was originally for the 21st of March, then the 28th, then the 6th of April, and finally 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. Is Trump chickening out, or is he buying time? Since January, Trump has coordinated the largest buildup of US troops in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. 40 to 50,000 US personnel stand ready across 10 countries, equipped to attack by air, land, and sea. As tonight's deadline approaches, we'll get an update from Iranian journalist Omid Memarian on the remaining hope for peace talks and how Iranians are feeling right now. First up, I'm joined by Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, former British military officer and Middle East advisor to the Ministry of Defence. Simon, welcome to MEELive. It's great to have you. Trump says a whole civilization will die tonight. Just give me your reaction to that.
Well, it's apocalyptic talk, but it's from a man who we already know from 4 years in his first presidency and the last year. It's extraordinary language, I have to say, from a head of state and a head of government, effectively. It's extraordinary stuff in the context of what we're dealing with. I have no objections to this campaign in Iran at the moment in terms of trying to make Iran behave as a respectable, responsible member of the international community. I'm all for its nuclear ambitions being thwarted. I'm all for its ballistic missile program being taken down. I would dearly love to see the regime change. But I think the sort of language is exactly the sort of counterproductive language. Equally, one is also conscious that Trump, while he hasn't used such apocryphal language before, is often it disguises what he says, what he does, what other people claim they're going to do, what actually happens. Is very difficult to tell, and I suspect you, myself, all your other listeners, readers, writers, viewers, will be slightly holding their breath. Or waiting to work out what the headline is when they wake up tomorrow morning.
Definitely.
It's very difficult. There are very many military options way within the bonds of what I would call the rules of war, the conduct of operations, way short of what he said. But the sort of thing he's talking about really would make me very nervous if I was a military planner or a military commander.
I mean, and indeed, we've seen many resignations from the senior ranks of the American military. So you've sort of painted two situations there. There is Trump following through on his threats, which imply indiscriminate civilian infrastructure decimation. And there are a handful of military maneuvers that, in your mind, make strategical sense. I know you probably don't want to guess what will happen tonight, but talk us through maybe the most likely or the most realistic military maneuvers that Trump can choose from in your mind.
Well, he's really set himself rhetorically up to do something dramatic. As I say, surprise and deception are two of the enduring principles of war. So in any war, and that includes, dare I say, the Iranians are masters of both, to be honest with you. There's a lot of talk, as we know, of Karg Island, something to do with Karg Island. There's definitely raids to be done on, I suspect, positions in the Straits of Hormuz. There would be a chance to distract with a bombing campaign while you did move the MEU through the Strait of Hormuz. The 82nd Airborne are out there somewhere. You wonder if they would give a message. At the moment. They tell the Iranian opposition, however you find that, to shelter. There may be a call to do something more dramatic. And of course, they would continue to drop, to drop ordnance. But so much of that ordnance, as you well know, is unseen by Western observers and probably by the vast majority of Iranians. It's hitting targets out in the deserts, up on the plateau, a long way away from the population centers. And there are attacks, obviously, in Tehran and around Isfahan, etc.
Do you think
it's quite difficult, having set yourself a very high bar, to know how you meet that without everybody saying you backed down or you've chickened out or you failed?
I mean, the question there, do you think it's inevitable that there will be, from Trump, a military escalation, that there will be some form of maybe boots on the ground? I mean, have we ever seen a build-up of troops like this that hasn't resulted in some kind of ground invasion?
No, I think, again, ground invasion, you mentioned Gulf War I and II, and I was in both of them. That was a really build-up of ground-based forces. That's tanks, that's armor, that's self-propelled, et cetera, et cetera. The ground element of anything the Americans can do is quite light. 82nd Airborne and the MEU. They have heavy equipment up to a point. But the bulk of what America can bring to the party at the moment is sea-based and air-based, ballistic as well. So we're not looking at large-scale maneuver forces, particularly not a country the size of Alaska with 90 million people in it. But you do have a lot of options, and there are a lot of single points of failure for the Iranian economy that could be targeted.
How risky would these?
That would come with its own problems. Needless to say.
I was going to inquire about that. Even with the options you've laid out, how risky would those options be for U.S. military personnel executing them? How much risk would that pose to U.S. service people's lives?
Well, there'd always be risk. I mean, you've only got to look at the potential strategic consequence of losing a pilot over the last few days. And it's all about what can you do that will genuinely put pressure on this regime, who have a very different cost-benefit analysis to what you call a normal regime. And the worry is, of course, if you study history, is we had to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan before that militaristic regime, would admit defeat. And we had to go all the way to Berlin in Germany to dig out the Nazis. And this Iranian Republican Guard Corps, this Islamic revolutionary regime, etc., is deeply embedded and has a very, very different view of the world than we Westerners or the Americans, or I suspect the Gulf monarchies on the other side of the Gulf. And so what is it that makes the regime say, enough is enough, we're in danger of failing because the economy is blown or the population will rise up? We've got to hand away our bargaining chip, which is currently control of the Strait of Hormuz. And it's more a threat to attack the Strait of Hormuz than it is control of the Strait of Hormuz, as you well know.
From many angles of looking at this, and even more so after hearing from you, it feels like Trump has cornered himself with his own rhetoric. I mean, he's repeatedly pushed back this deadline. He has plenty to lose from escalation, and it remains unclear what his objectives with this war even are. What do you make of the advice that Donald Trump is getting? Do you think it's good advice?
Well, it is very difficult to say, and I'd hate to second guess what's going on, but there are worries that the nature of the Trump administration, the nature of the people in the inner circle, do not lend itself to grown-up discussions about ends, ways, and means, about the connection between military action and political objectives, discussions about where the center of gravity, as we call it, of the Iranian regime really is. We know where its capabilities are, but does that attacking that, does that correspond to the regime changing? The military will have come up with a very, very well thought through military plan, without doubt. We've been looking at this problem set in Iran for decades, including the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. But ultimately, these are, as Clausewitz always says, it's politics by other means. And we've got a battle of the narratives. We've got strategic objectives that are absolutely held in, dare I say, obviously Washington and Tehran, but also in Beijing, also in Delhi, also in Moscow at the moment. And, you know, the Israelis have got one agenda, of course, the Americans have another. They overlap to a large degree, but they're not necessarily totally aligned. And both of them have other issues that are not, Iran is not right at the heart of them. America has China, and Israel has events closer to home. And that worries me, that people, having made something that's drawn us all in, will not see this through to a situation that actually draws a line on basically 50 years of conflict in the Middle East, much of it driven by the presence of the Islamic revolutionary regime in Tehran.
Sir Simon Mayall, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. There is an alternative to military escalation. The US and Iran are negotiating via Pakistan, though they disagree as much about the nature of the talks as the terms of the agreement themselves. The US delivered a 15-point peace plan 2 weeks ago, demanding Iran end all nuclear enrichment activity, curtail its ballistic missile program, as well as its regional activity, and lift its blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. In exchange, the US offered to lift sanctions and negotiate a broader peace settlement within 15 to 20 days. Iran rejected this and countered with its own demands: an end to Israel's war in Lebanon, guarantees against future aggression, reparations for war damages, and recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran also called for a permanent end to the war rather than a temporary ceasefire. Adding to these disagreements is Iranian suspicion over US intentions. Iran has repeatedly accused the US of using the talks as a decoy for military maneuvers, and not for the first time. The outbreak of war in late February came as a shock during weeks of negotiations that appeared to have reached a breakthrough just days earlier, according to Omani mediators involved. We are hours from Trump's deadline, and he's warned a whole civilization will die with no deal. Is there any hope of resolution? Omid Memarian is an Iranian journalist based in the US. Omid, welcome to MEELive. How realistic is a diplomatic resolution today? Can Iran avoid the devastation that Trump has just threatened?
This is entirely This is entirely based on what President Trump is going to do. It's not in Iran's court anymore, the ball. The Iranians over the past few weeks have laid out a number of demands for the U.S. to create an off-ramp to end the war. But we have seen from the U.S. government that they have listed a number of different demands, maximalist demands, that they don't look to be designed to have a solution to get to a solution with the Iranian government. They have these demands range from regime change to Iran's nuclear program, missiles program, proxy groups, and we don't see any coherent political objective when it comes to the U.S. government. That's the problem. For the Iranians, they understand, as you mentioned in the intro, they understand that ceasefire is not a solution. A short-term peace with the U.S. is not a solution. If they want to have a long-term peace with the U.S. and if they want not to be bombed again, like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, they should be a much longer arrangement, security and economic arrangement with the United States and Israel. And I think that's not something President Trump would, at this point at least, consider, because it would look like a failure for the president if he decides to do so.
It sounds like you're not optimistic of a resolution diplomatically being reached in time for tonight's deadline. Is that correct?
At the end of the day, to resolve this issue, everything, it should be resolved by negotiations. Even, the U.S. destroys half of the country. At the end of the day, Iran's missiles program, Iran's nuclear program, they are organic programs. They have the know-how of these technologies, and they can build centrifuges anytime they want. They can build missiles anytime they want. So at the end of the day, even you destroy the entire infrastructure of missiles and nuclear program, you have to sit down with Iranians and negotiate with them. But why not before destroying the entire country and creating a lot of casualties? What the U.S. is doing right now is playing into the hands of the Iranian government. Over the past few months, the President of the United States has repeatedly said what we are aiming to do is to weaken the Iranian government, is to go after the Iranian regime. But the Iranian people, are different. We're going to support them. What is happening now is that he's going after the civilization itself, the Iranian civilization. I don't know what that means, but the Iranian Iran as a nation, as a geography, as a sense of identity, and I think that's something the Israeli government, Netanyahu and Trump, they have tried to portray Iranians different than the Iranian government. They have said that we are there to support you and your plight for democracy and freedom. And they have tried to put the pressure on the Iranian government. What is happening now is that the Iranian people are seeing that it's not about the Iranian government. It's not about helping the Iranian people to, for example, overthrow the Iranian government. The intention and the acts that we have seen, like in the past 4, 5, 6 weeks, is aimed at Iran as a unit of geography, as Iranian identity, Iran as a state, as a nation. And I think that's a gift to the Iranian regime, because President Trump was supposed to create cracks within the Iranian government. They were supposed to break the back of the machinery of repression in Iran. They were supposed to create situations in which we have mass defections from the loyalists of the regime. Now what he has done is that he has brought so many people who were against the regime, who are still against the regime, but behind the flag, because they are not happy and they would not agree with Iran to be destroyed. So I think, when you look back, the Iranian regime might be very satisfied with the way the President of the United States and Bibi Netanyahu, they have helped the Iranian government to keep its base intact, to keep the morale of the supporters intact, and actually bring more people to his camp.
Wow. And how on earth are Iranians feeling in the face of Trump's indiscriminate threats of violence? I know it's very difficult to gauge what's happening in Iran due to the blackout, but are you able to give us a sense of how people are feeling as this deadline approaches?
From the conversations I've had on and off in the past few days, and particularly in the past 24 hours, people are very exhausted of 6 weeks of bombardment and horror and terror. And even those who thought that in the beginning that as it was sold to President Trump and as it was sold to some Iranians, that this is going to be a short war. We bomb Iranian leadership, political and military leadership, and the Iranian government will collapse. People come to the street, and we will have a new democratic government in Iran. People who were sold this idea, now they are understanding that the intention and the operation, everything else is not geared toward that type of Disney-like scenario. And this is much darker, and it's not about the regime change in Iran. It's not about going after the Iranian regime, and it's entirely about the weakening Iran as a state. And I think it's for many people, it's very terrifying. And I know people who lived in the same home, the husband against the attack, against the war, the wife pro-war, and both thinking like, there would be a huge change after the war. But now they are getting closer to each other in a sense that they believe that this attack is not about the Iranian people. It's not about their plight for democracy. It's not about their plight for freedoms, or to weaken the cycles of violence by the Iranian regime. And I think that's this is so unfortunate, because what President Trump and Netanyahu have done over the past few weeks has been to basically giving a huge gift to the Iranian government and its propaganda machine.
Legal experts are certainly with your analysis that this is targeting civilians, this is targeting Iran at large. Many experts are widely referring to Trump's threats as open declarations of war crimes. He says he'll target bridges and power plants. But is this new? You have been reporting on civilian infrastructure damage happening in Iran. Just tell us how heavily civilian infrastructure is already being targeted.
This has been very heartbreaking for millions of Iranians, seeing some of the very prominent infrastructures in Iran that belong to the Iran as a nation, to the Iranian people, to be destroyed. Millions of Iranians are dependent on these industries, like the steel industries or the petrochemical industry, or the oil industry, and many Iranians' livelihood is, it's very much connected to these industries. And so by destroying these factories, facilities, and industries, what the government, what the Israelis and the U.S. are doing is to directly impacting the quality of life of millions of Iranians, regardless of the Islamic Republic. This is not designed to basically weaken the Islamic Republic. It's about weakening the Iranian as a nation. And what happens next is that the U.S. and Israel, they claim that by attacking Iranian infrastructures, people get overwhelmed and frustrated, and they might rise up and go to the streets and topple the regime. But the underlying factor is that attacking infrastructures, that the most beneficiary of those places are civilians, is prohibited under the international law, and it can amount to war crimes. And to also think that you commit a war crime to gain a political to have it for a political purpose. I think it's even darker and shows the very convoluted nature of this war.
Specifically, Omid, you've also called attention to the destruction of universities in Iran. You're an academic. Can you speak to the impact and the intention, possibly, of targeting centers of learning in this war on Iran?
Like for many people in the region, education is the cornerstone of every family. And Iranians are very proud of the educational institutions they have built over the past century. And yes, we know in every country, the military or the government uses parts of the educational system for their research and for their projects. But the most beneficiary of universities are ordinary people. And to destroy universities that is very instrumental to civilian life, because the military had a project there, or they have done some research over there, I think it's absurd. It's just unconscionable, and it's against international law. And just because the military might have had programs in some universities or in some schools does not justify to destroy the entire building. And I see, like, there's a pattern here. We have seen it in Gaza. We have seen it in other countries, how Israelis are operated. They go after the center of knowledge. They go after the heart of the society and the brain of the society. And that's been intentionally designed to weaken a state, a nation as a whole. It's not about the military. It's not about just the government. And I think that's been terrifying for people to see university after university going down. Schools of physics and chemistry and mathematics and other schools are being harmed. So I think it's a very terrible trend. I can't say enough how much people are overwhelmed and terrified by what's happening.
Thank you, Omid. And finally, I want to ask you about Iran's claims that the US is not seriously engaging in talks. We've heard Trump repeatedly say Iran must come to the table and agree to his deal. But Iran says this deal isn't meant sincerely. It's just a front to prepare for military escalation. How much truth is there in this?
Since the beginning of this war, there has never been a serious negotiation between Iranians and the U.S. or Israel. There has never been a serious conversation. What the U.S. Has put forward is an ultimatum. An ultimatum is not a kind of agenda for sincere negotiations, and Iranians have paid so much over the past few years, and it's obvious for them. They don't have any trust in the U.S. and they are not willing to accept the U.S. conditions, and that's why they have tried to. They have regionalized the war. They have launched a full-fledged asymmetric war against the U.S., going after U.S. interests in the region, after U.S. allies in the region, and they have been planning to cause the most harm to the U.S. So maybe that because of the cost, the U.S. President Trump decides to stop the war and find an off ramp and end the war. And that's I think that's the way the Iranian government is acting right now is an indicator of the fact that they don't believe that they don't believe that there is any sincere negotiations in place.
Omid Memarian, thank you so much for joining us. And for today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we want to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email MEELive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.